I was 37 when my own stepsister walked into a lawyer's office, convinced she was about to claim the fortune that came with my husband, until my attorney started laughing in her face. Before I take you through how that settlement meeting turned into her worst nightmare, drop a pin in the comments and let me know where you're tuning in from. It's a story that gets wild, and I want to know who's here with me. The conference room had that oppressive kind of quiet, the kind that settles into your bones from the expensive, cold leather chairs and the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a sprawling cityscape. It was designed for ending things, partnerships, careers, futures. On the other side of the long table sat my husband, David. He was staring at his folded hands like they belonged to someone else. He looked like a stranger in the tailored jacket I'd helped him pick out just last spring for a company gala. Next to him, my stepsister, Vanessa. Her eyes never left my face. It was a look that carried equal parts pity and smug victory, and it made my skin prickle. She was wearing a sharp, pale pink suit, the kind of thing she could only afford on David's credit line. Everything about her was deliberate, the soft hand resting on her stomach, the practiced look of reluctant sorrow on her lips. She was playing the part of the woman who had no choice but to fall in love. "Amanda," she said, her voice a low, honeyed whisper that barely made it across the table. "I know this is painful. I truly am sorry." She let her eyes drift down to her midsection, a gesture meant for everyone in the room, a silent announcement of her supposed victory. "We just want to make this as painless as possible, for everyone." I didn't say a word. My heartbeat was a steady, heavy drum in my chest. I focused on that rhythm, using it to ground myself. I just watched her, noticing the tiny muscle in her jaw jump as my silence started to unnerve her. She interpreted it as me being broken, as a sign that I was defeated. "Look," she pressed, leaning in like we were sharing a secret. "I told David we need to be generous. This is a tough transition, so just tell us what you want for alimony. Seriously, whatever you need to get back on your feet. I'll make sure you're taken care of." And then it happened. My lawyer, Alara, a woman whose reputation for ruthlessness was only matched by her razor-sharp suits, let out a short, sharp laugh. It wasn't loud, but in that silent, pressurized room, it was deafening. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated amusement. Vanessa's face contorted. The mask of sympathy slipped, revealing a flash of raw irritation. "Is there a problem?" she snapped, her gentle act evaporating. Alara just shook her head, a slow, dangerous smile curving her lips. She didn't bother to answer Vanessa. Instead, she turned to me. I finally let my gaze lock onto my stepsister, letting the cold focus I'd been holding in finally show. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice lower than I intended and sharper than the glass table between us. "That you can afford it?" It was a simple question, but it hung in the air like a fuse being lit. Because to understand why a high-powered corporate lawyer was laughing at my divorce settlement, you need to understand the empire they thought they were stealing. You need to understand the blood, sweat, and years I poured into its foundation. And you need to understand that they had no idea who actually built it. It all began with a vow I made to myself in a cramped apartment that always smelled like floor wax and my mother's exhaustion. Growing up, I watched her work double shifts, cleaning houses by day and waiting tables at night. Her hands were always raw, her back perpetually aching. She taught me that you don't wait for opportunities, you create them. She taught me that grit was the only inheritance that truly mattered. It got me through college on a full ride and into a career in finance, where numbers became my language. I loved the clean, unforgiving logic of a balance sheet. It never lied. It told a story of profit or loss, and I learned how to write the successful ones. Then I met David. He was the opposite of my world. He was charismatic, laid back, the sole heir to the sterling development fortune. He was born on third base and thought he'd hit a triple. I fell for the idea of a different life, a softer one. When we got married, I was ready to leave my demanding job, to trade boardrooms for a nursery, to focus on building a family, a home. But my father-in-law, Arthur Sterling, the man who had built a billion-dollar enterprise from nothing, saw something else in me. He was forged from the same grit as my mother. A few months after the wedding, he called me into his grand, wood-paneled office. "Amanda," he said, his eyes sharp and assessing over his reading glasses. This company needs a mind for strategy and a spine of steel. You have both. My son. He has the name. Come work for us. The challenge was irresistible. I said yes, telling myself it would be temporary. But from my first day, I saw the truth in Arthur's words. David treated the company like a personal playground. He'd roll in around 10, charm the secretaries, and be gone by lunch for a client meeting that was usually on a golf course. He had the title of vice president, a seat on the board, but he was a ghost in the machine, a handsome figurehead on a ship he had no idea how to steer. I remember one night early on. I came home close to midnight, my brain fried. I'd spent the last 8 hours untangling a critical payroll glitch caused by a new software update. It was tedious, invisible work, but if I hadn't caught it, hundreds of our workers, people with families, wouldn't have gotten paid. I walked in to find David on the couch, headphones on, lost in a video game. The coffee table was littered with empty snack wrappers. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice tight with exhaustion. "There was a crisis at work. I could have used your help." He didn't even pause the game. "You handled it, right?" he said, eyes still glued to the screen. "You're better at that detail stuff anyway. I'm more of a big picture guy." It felt like a bucket of ice water. He wasn't just lazy, he was willfully detached. His inheritance wasn't a responsibility to him, it was a permanent safety net, a trust fund with a corporate letterhead. He never worried about the details because someone else, first his father and now me, always would. So I dove in. I poured every ounce of the grit my mother taught me into that company. Arthur became my mentor. He taught me the business from the ground up. The smell of wet concrete at a 5:00 a.m. pour, the weight of a blueprint, the art of negotiating with union foremen who could spot a fraud from a mile away. The board, a group of gray-haired men who'd been with Arthur for decades, was skeptical at first. A woman and a banker at that. But numbers don't lie. I streamlined budgets, renegotiated supply chains, and pushed us into new, profitable markets. Profits climbed quarter after quarter. Slowly, their skepticism turned to respect. They started coming to my office, not David, for final approval on major deals. But while my professional life was soaring, my personal life was quietly, painfully disintegrating. The deepest cut, the one that left a permanent scar, was our struggle to have a child. We'd been trying for years. It was the one dream I had left from that simpler life I once imagined. After months of disappointment, we went to a specialist. The waiting rooms were always sterile and silent, filled with couples wearing the same look of strained hope. I'd sit there, clutching my purse, while David scrolled endlessly through his phone, sighing with impatience. The physical toll was immense. The injections, the hormones that made me feel like a stranger in my own body, the constant appointments, I did it all. I remember one morning trying to give myself an injection in the bathroom, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't do it. I called out to David for help. He came to the door, looked at the needle, and recoiled. "Ugh, Amanda, I can't. Needles freak me out. You've got this." He walked away, leaving me alone, crying on the bathroom floor. I'll never forget the day the doctor sat us down after our second failed IVF cycle. He spoke in gentle, clinical terms about my low ovarian reserve, about the difficult odds. He laid out the options, a third, more aggressive cycle, or considering other paths. I sat there, the words blurring, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. I was hollowed out, emotionally and physically exhausted. I looked at David, desperate for some sign of support, for him to take my hand and say, "We'll get through this." Instead, on the silent car ride home, he just stared out the window. Finally, he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "You know, maybe this is a sign. This is all just so much stress, Amanda. And all those hormones, they're making you so emotional. Maybe we should just stop forcing it. If it happens, it happens." "If it happens," my voice was a choked whisper. "David, the doctor just said it probably won't just happen. This is our last real chance." He finally turned to look at me, and his eyes were completely blank. "I just don't want you to get all worked up over it. It's not the end of the world." He didn't see that my heart was shattering in front of him. He saw my pain as an inconvenience, another problem he'd rather I handle quietly. That night, I cried myself to sleep while he slept soundly beside me, not a care in the world. A part of me died that day. The part that believed we were a team, that my dreams were his dreams. So I did what I always do when I'm hurt. I worked. I poured all that pain, all that frustrated hope into sterling development. Work didn't disappoint me. Work didn't tell me to calm down when I was hurting. Work gave back exactly what I put in. I became relentless. I stayed later. I worked harder. And the company thrived. Arthur saw it all. He never mentioned the baby, but he started giving me more and more control, grooming me, not his own son, to take over. The promotion was never announced publicly to save David the embarrassment. But within the company, everyone knew who was really in charge. I was the acting CEO in everything but name. And David, he drifted further away, content in his own little world, oblivious to the woman I was becoming right next to him. Then Vanessa blew into our lives like a storm looking for a place to land. She arrived in Atlanta with a cloud of drama and a mountain of debt. Her marriage to a prominent attorney had imploded spectacularly after she was caught cheating, and her divorce had left her with a taste for luxury she could no longer afford. She showed up at our door with 3 designer suitcases and a well-rehearsed story of being a broken victim, needing a place to stay, just for a little while. David, with his chronic allergy to conflict, agreed immediately. I, on the other hand, knew my stepsister. Vanessa had a lifelong habit of wanting whatever I had. When we were kids, it was my favorite doll. In high school, it was my boyfriend. Now she was looking at my life, at our beautiful penthouse, at the sterling name, and her eyes had a dangerous, calculating glint. Her campaign was a masterclass in manipulation. At first, it was all praise for David. "You're so lucky, Amanda," she'd say at dinner, her voice full of admiration. "David is so strong and decisive. He must be incredible at running the company. It's so wonderful that he lets you have your little career, too." I'd just smile tightly, a muscle twitching in my jaw. David would puff up his chest, soaking it in. He never corrected her. He loved the idea of being the powerful CEO she imagined him to be. Vanessa did a little digging, but only enough to confirm her own biases. She found old press releases from years ago nomming David as the heir. She heard him on the phone talking about a multi-million-dollar project, not realizing he was just repeating talking points I had written for him for a board meeting he'd probably skip. Her greed was a filter that blocked out any inconvenient truths. She saw the name and the legacy, and she assumed the man came with the power and the bank account. Her attacks on me were insidious. She'd make comments to David when I was working late. "Poor Amanda, she works so hard. A woman shouldn't have to carry that much stress. A real wife would be home more." She started planting seeds of doubt with my mother-in-law, whispering about how my ambition was probably the real reason we never had children. I overheard her on the phone in the hallway one afternoon, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "No, of course she's sad, but her career has always been her baby. Some women are just built differently." It escalated from whispers to outright sabotage. One evening, we were hosting a major company event for investors at a downtown hotel. It was a critical night. I was scheduled to give the keynote presentation, the one that would set the tone for the next fiscal year. 5 minutes before I was due on stage, Vanessa, wearing a stunning crimson dress that drew every eye, tripped next to me. An entire glass of red wine went cascading down the front of my cream-colored silk suit. "Oh my God, Amanda, I am so sorry," she cried, dabbing at the massive stain with a cocktail napkin, making it smear and bleed. Her face was a mask of horror, but her eyes, for a split second, were triumphant. I saw it. I had to give my presentation in a borrowed, ill-fitting blazer from the hotel event coordinator. I nailed the speech, my voice never wavering, but I felt small, humiliated, and deeply, deeply angry. I knew she was a snake, but I was too busy running a billion-dollar company to play her petty high school games. I underestimated her desperation, and that was my mistake. The final blow came on a Tuesday. It was the culmination of a 6-month, brutal negotiation with a Japanese consortium. It was a deal that would secure the company's future for the next decade, opening up an entirely new international market. It was my deal. I had built it from scratch, flown to Tokyo 3 times, and outmaneuvered every competitor. That afternoon, the final contract was signed. My father-in-law called me, his voice thick with pride. "You did it, Amanda. You're the best CEO this company has ever had." I drove home on a cloud, feeling a sense of accomplishment that almost filled the hollow spaces in my life. I walked into the penthouse, ready to celebrate. Maybe even hopping this monumental win would be something David and I could share, a tiny spark in the dying embers of our marriage. He was waiting for me in the living room. He wasn't smiling. He was packing, a thing I'd never seen him do. The look on his face was one of nervous resolve. "Amanda, we need to talk," he said, stopping as I came in. My stomach dropped. I thought it was about the company. Maybe he was feeling overshadowed by my success. "I just closed the Tanaka deal," I said, trying to keep my voice light, holding up my briefcase like a trophy. "That's great," he said, but his eyes were empty. He wouldn't look at me. He took a deep, shaky breath. "Vanessa is pregnant, and it's mine. I want a divorce." The words didn't register at first. It was like he was speaking a foreign language. Pregnant. Divorce. My brain couldn't connect the sounds to their meaning. The signed, company-saving contract in my briefcase suddenly felt like a block of lead. My greatest professional triumph and my most devastating personal failure delivered in the same hour. I felt a hot flash crawl up my neck, and my vision blurred at the edges. The room seemed to tilt. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to demand how he could do this to me after everything. But all that came out was a strangled whisper. "What?" "She's pregnant," he repeated, finally looking at the floor, unable to face me. "I'm sorry." Sorry, the word was so small, so pathetic. He had torched our marriage, betrayed me with my own stepsister in my own home, and all he had to offer was sorry. In that moment, watching him refuse to meet my eyes, I realized the man I married didn't really exist. He was a ghost. The life I thought we had was a complete and utter illusion. The shock was so profound, it was like being plunged into icy water. Everything was slow, muffled. I remember walking to the kitchen, my legs feeling disconnected from my body, and pouring a glass of water. My hand was so steady, it was bizarre. My world had just ended, but my body was on autopilot, performing the mundane tasks of life. That night I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat on the couch in the dark, long after David had packed a bag and left to go be with her. I just sat there in our silent, empty penthouse, and I felt nothing. It was a terrifying, hollow emptiness. The pain was so big my mind just shut down to protect itself. But as the sun started to rise, casting long gray shadows across the expensive furniture, something else began to surface through the numbness. It was a cold, hard clarity. The shock was wearing off, and underneath it was a bedrock of anger. Not the hot, screaming kind that burns out quickly, but a focused, glacial rage. They thought they could take everything from me. They thought I was just the wife, the woman who would crumble and be paid off to disappear quietly. They had made a catastrophic miscalculation. They had forgotten who I was. I wasn't the heartbroken wife anymore. I was the CEO of Sterling Development, and I was about to handle this like a hostile takeover. The next morning, I didn't call my mom to cry. I didn't call a friend for sympathy. I put on my sharpest suit, a dark navy one I called my armor. I did my makeup with a steady hand, covering the dark circles under my eyes. Then I drove to my in-laws' estate. I walked into my father-in-law's study and laid it all out, not as a grieving wife seeking comfort, but as his business partner reporting a critical threat. "David is having an affair with my stepsister," I said, my voice even and devoid of emotion. "She claims she's pregnant. He's asked for a divorce. This is going to be messy, and it presents a significant risk to the company's stability and reputation if it becomes public. Vanessa is not a stable person. She will be demanding." He listened without interrupting, his face like stone, his hands steepled under his chin. When I was done, he was silent for a long moment, his eyes boring into mine. I saw a flicker of pain in them, the pain of a father's disappointment, but it was quickly replaced by the cold calculation of a CEO. "He is a fool," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "A damn fool, but this company is not his to risk. It's ours. Your position is secure. You are the leader of this company, Amanda. Nothing changes that. Handle your divorce. I'll handle my son." I left his house with a clear mandate. The weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter. The next call I made was to Alara. She was a legend in corporate law, a shark who specialized in high-stakes litigation. I'd worked with her on an acquisition deal a year prior and was impressed by her ruthless efficiency. We met in her sleek, minimalist office that afternoon. I gave her the same rundown, sticking to the facts. "So," she said, leaning back in her chair, a pen tapping against her chin. "They think he's the one with the power and the money. They think he's the king." I confirmed. "And she thinks she's going to be the queen, complete with a new little prince or princess on the way." Alara smiled, a slow, predatory smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, this is going to be fun. They have no idea they're trying to stage a coup in a kingdom where you're already sitting on the throne. Let's get all our documents in order. His employment contract, his salary statements, the corporate ownership records for all assets, including your primary residence." I spent the next 2 weeks in a strange state of suspended animation. At work, I was focused, decisive, leading meetings and making multi-million-dollar decisions without missing a beat. But at night, I'd go home to the silence of the penthouse, and the anger would give way to waves of grief. I'd find myself staring at a photo of David and me from our wedding, a photo of two smiling strangers, and I'd feel a pain for the woman I used to be. Meanwhile, Vanessa was busy playing the victor on social media. She posted pictures of herself and David at my favorite restaurants with captions like, "Finally finding the happiness I deserve." She even posted a picture of an ultrasound, a blurry black and white image that was supposed to be my final humiliation. Every post was a twist of the knife. But with every picture, my resolve hardened. She wasn't just taking my husband. She was trying to erase my entire life. She was dancing on the grave of my marriage, and I was about to show her that she was celebrating far, far too soon. The day of the settlement meeting arrived. I walked into that cold conference room feeling like a general on the eve of battle. I was calm. I was focused. I was ready. The air in the conference room was thick with unspoken hostility. Vanessa walked in like she was stepping onto a red carpet, a triumphant smirk plastered on her face. She sat down and immediately took control, or at least she thought she did. "Amanda," she began, her voice dripping with that fake, condescending pity. "I know this is hard, so let's just get the finances out of the way. I told David we have to be generous. Just name your price for the alimony, whatever you need to start over. I'll make sure you're taken care of." My lawyer, Alara, just raised an eyebrow. I remained silent, letting Vanessa hang herself with her own arrogance. This was her show. I wanted to see how she'd perform. "And about the penthouse," Vanessa continued, waving a dismissive hand. "Obviously, David and I will be living there. It's his family's property, after all. You'll need to have your things moved out by the end of the month." This was the moment, the first domino. Alara, who had been quietly organizing a stack of documents, looked up. "That's interesting," she said, her voice cool and professional. She slid a thick, bound document across the polished table. It landed in front of Vanessa's lawyer with a soft, definitive thud. "Because this document is the title deed for the entire building. It's owned free and clear by Sterling Development Incorporated. It's a corporate asset." Vanessa frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "So, it's a company penthouse. It's part of his executive package. A perk." "Not exactly," Alara countered, sliding another paper over. This one was a single sheet. "This is the standard employee lease agreement for that property. The penthouse is leased to employees at fair market rate, which is deducted from their payroll. The current monthly rent is—" She named a figure that made David, who had been silent until now, physically flinch in his chair. My salary can't cover that," he mumbled, looking genuinely shocked. It was the first time he seemed to grasp that any of this had real-world consequences for him. Vanessa's face, which had been so smug, was starting to show cracks. "What are you talking about? Your salary? You're the heir to the company," she hissed at David, her voice a harsh whisper, forgetting for a moment that we were all in the room. This was my cue. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the table. For the first time, I spoke directly to her, my voice low and steady. "He's not the heir, Vanessa. He's an employee. A senior advisor, to be precise. That's his official title." Alara slid over David's employment contract, which I had personally signed off on 2 years prior. His job title and duties were clearly outlined. Then came the final piece of paper, his most recent pay stub. "This is his gross monthly salary," Alara said plainly. "And this is his net pay after taxes and his 401k contribution." The number on that paper was respectable for a normal person, but it was pocket change in the world Vanessa thought she was entering. It was a fraction of what her lawyer ex-husband made. It was nowhere near enough to fund her extravagant lifestyle, let alone pay the rent on that penthouse or the alimony she owed her ex. Vanessa stared at the pay stub, her face cycling through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, and finally a blotchy, furious red. She snatched the paper from the table, her eyes scanning it as if the numbers would change if she stared hard enough. "This is a joke," she spat, finally turning her fury on me. Her voice was no longer a whisper. "You're lying. This is some kind of trick. You cooked the books." "It's no trick," I said, my voice steady. The rage I'd been holding back for weeks was finally turning into a cold, satisfying power. "It's just the truth. A truth you were too greedy and too lazy to ever look for." "But the CEO," she stammered, looking wildly between me and David, her eyes wide with panic. "Who's the CEO? Arthur." Alara leaned back in her chair, a broad, triumphant smile spreading across her face. She gestured toward me with her pen. "You're looking at her," Alara announced, her voice ringing with finality. "Amanda was appointed acting CEO by the board 18 months ago on her father-in-law's recommendation. Her compensation package, which includes a salary, performance bonuses, and significant stock options, not to mention full discretionary control over all corporate assets, including the penthouse, is a bit more substantial." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Vanessa's jaw was literally hanging open. She looked at me, then at David, then back at me. The smugness, the pity, the triumph, it all melted away, replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Her entire fantasy, her whole pathetic scheme, had been built on a foundation of lies, and I had just pulled the pin. She finally found her voice, a strangled, ugly sound that was half scream, half sob. "You let me believe," she shrieked at David, turning on him with the fury of a cornered animal. "You let me think you were in charge. You told me you ran everything." David just shrank in his chair, unable to look at her, unable to look at me. He was a child being scolded. I didn't. I mean, Amanda handles most of the day-to-day stuff." "Handles it?" Vanessa's voice rose to a hysterical pitch. "She is it, and you're nothing. I left my life for nothing." The fight drained out of her as quickly as it had appeared. She slumped in her chair, the expensive pale pink suit suddenly looking cheap and gaudy. The woman who had walked in expecting to claim her prize was now staring at the ruins of her own greed. The divorce settlement was over before it had even really begun. There was nothing to split. No joint fortune, no shared inheritance, no penthouse. Just David's modest salary and a mountain of her own debt. I stood up, my chair making a quiet scraping sound on the floor. "I think we're done here," I said to Alara. I walked out of that room without a backward glance, leaving them to sit in the wreckage they had created. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I just felt free. The fallout was swift and brutal. The story of the disastrous settlement meeting spread through the family like wildfire. But the final nail in Vanessa's coffin, the one that sealed her fate for good, came from an unexpected source: my mother-in-law. Initially, she had been cautiously excited about the prospect of a grandchild, even under these sordid circumstances. But after the truth about David's position in the company came out, her suspicions were aroused. She was a woman who could spot a fake handbag from a mile away, and Vanessa's story suddenly felt very, very fake. She started asking questions, simple, innocent questions. "Which doctor are you seeing, dear? When can I come with you to an appointment? I'd love to hear the heartbeat." Vanessa panicked. She became evasive, making up excuses, changing the subject. "Oh, it's too early for that," or "my doctor doesn't allow guests in the room because of policy." Her web of lies was too tangled, and she wasn't smart enough to keep it straight. My mother-in-law, her maternal instincts now fully replaced by a sharp sense of betrayal, knew something was wrong. She told my father-in-law her concerns. He didn't hesitate. He hired a private investigator. It took less than 48 hours to uncover the truth. There was no pregnancy. There had never been a pregnancy. The ultrasound picture she'd posted online was a stock image from the internet, easily found with a reverse image search. She had faked the entire thing, a desperate, pathetic, last-ditch attempt to trap David and secure a connection to the sterling fortune. When my father-in-law confronted her with the evidence, a printed-out, multi-page report with dates, times, and damning proof, she didn't even try to deny it. The rage in that house must have been biblical. My father-in-law, a man who valued legacy and family above all else, had been lied to about the one thing he craved most, a grandchild. He threw her out that very day. He told her if she ever contacted any member of the Sterling family again, he would not only sue her for fraud, but make sure every sordid detail of her deception was leaked to the press. Faced with total ruin and public humiliation, Vanessa disappeared. She packed her bags in the middle of the night and was gone, leaving David to face his parents, crushing disappointment alone. A few days later, David showed up at my new apartment. I'd rented a smaller, simpler place in Midtown, a space that was entirely my own, filled with my things, my choices. When I saw him at the door through the peephole, he looked like a ghost. He was pale, thin, and the easy charm was gone, replaced by a desperate, hollow look. I opened the door, but blocked the entrance with my body. "Amanda," he started, his voice cracking. "I made a mistake, a terrible, terrible mistake. She lied about everything. The pregnancy, all of it. I was an idiot, a complete idiot. Can we please just talk? Maybe we could try again. We could go to counseling." I looked at the man standing in my doorway, and for the first time I felt a flicker of pity, not for the loss of him, but for how truly pathetic he was. He wasn't evil. He was just weak. A man-child who had floated through life on a cloud of privilege and had finally crashed to earth. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he got caught, and sorry his golden ticket had turned out to be fake. But pity isn't a foundation for a marriage. It's an epitaph. "No, David," I said, my voice gentle but firm, like a doctor delivering a final diagnosis. "We can't. This was never about our lies. This was about your choices. You checked out of our marriage long before Vanessa ever showed up. You were gone the day you told me my pain over not having a child was just stress. You were gone every time you chose a video game over your responsibilities to this family, to your father's company. She was just a symptom of a disease that was already there. I'm done." He started to protest, to plead, but I just shook my head. "Goodbye, David." I closed the door, and for the first time I knew it was really over. The lock clicking into place was the sound of my future beginning. Life after the storm was quiet at first. My father-in-law handled David. He wasn't fired, which I was grateful for his mother's sake. Instead, he was transferred to a remote subsidiary office in rural Alabama, overseeing inventory logistics. A demotion so profound it was a public statement. He was no longer the heir. He was just another employee, finally forced to earn his keep, to face the consequences of his own inaction. With the drama gone, my focus returned to the one thing that had never let me down, my work. But something was different. I wasn't working to escape anymore. I was working to build. The board officially removed acting from my title. At a formal meeting, Arthur stood up and made the announcement himself. I was the CEO of Sterling Development. The first thing I did was greenlight a project I had been dreaming of for years, an initiative to build affordable, high-quality housing communities using sustainable materials. It was a riskier, lower-margin venture than our usual skyscrapers, but it was work that mattered. It was work that built homes, not just buildings. Then I did something for myself, for the woman I had become. I established the Alina Sterling Mentorship Program, named after my mother-in-law, who had become one of my staunchest allies. It was a program designed to fund and support women entering careers in construction, engineering, and architecture, fields traditionally dominated by men. I wanted to give other women the kind of support my father-in-law had given me. I wanted to turn my painful experience into a ladder for someone else to climb. My relationship with my in-laws transformed. They treated me not as a daughter-in-law, but as the true successor to the family legacy. We'd have dinner once a week, talking about the future of the company, a future that was now firmly in my hands. They valued me more than their own son, a fact that was both a triumph and a quiet, lingering tragedy. I found peace in my new, smaller apartment. It wasn't a corporate showpiece. It was a home. I filled it with books and art and the quiet satisfaction of a life I had built with my own two hands, on my own terms. A few months ago, I was on the rooftop of our newest building, a gleaming tower that scraped the city sky. The dedication ceremony was over, and I was alone, looking out at the lights spreading out like a carpet of diamonds. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the humiliation. It would have been so easy to become bitter, to let that rage consume me and turn me into someone hard and brittle. But looking out at that view, at the tangible proof of what I could create, I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The betrayal didn't break me. It revealed me. It stripped away the life I thought I wanted and forced me to embrace the woman I was truly meant to be. My mom taught me to work hard. My father-in-law taught me to lead. But David and Vanessa, in their own twisted, destructive way, taught me my most valuable lesson, that my worth was never tied to a man, a marriage, or a name. It was tied to my own strength, my own integrity, and my own resilience. I wasn't just a survivor of my story. I was its architect. Thank you so much for listening to my journey today. It means the world to share it with you all. I have to ask, have you ever had a moment in your life where a betrayal actually ended up making you stronger? Let me know your story in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to Winds of Thought for more. Keep building your own path, and I'll see you in the next one.